Item number 4, discussion and possible action to adopt ordinance number 3322 to amend ordinance number 3075, known as the Historic Preservation Ordinance. Staff. Leroy?
Think we have a few people that may be leaving. If it's okay, I'll wait just a few
Sure,
minutes.
absolutely.
Couple minutes to let everybody shuffle.
We got people to speak on this too, or not?
Probably.
You go first, though.
Yes.
Man, you grew old while you was gone. You got old while you was gone.
We got Chatty Cathy here tonight.
I've been stuck in an attic all day, Dad.
Okay.
You gotta talk
Okay.
sometime.
I will start out, we've had a couple other issues that I've had to deal with the last week or so. So if you notice that there's any typos in my presentation, please bear with me and forgive me. I had to kind of put this together in between discussions on some of our other issues tonight. City staff recognizes clearly there's been some miscommunication and differences in opinion on what entities have final authority over various elements of Mineral Wells Park project. City staff, of course, takes partial responsibility for any miscommunications or misunderstandings. The Historic Preservation Commission is not the enemy. City staff does appreciate the passion of the Historic Preservation Commission and their commitment to our community. However, we have come to a point that we disagree on some elements, and it's not clear who makes final decision, and we would like some clarity there. Most of the headbutting or disagreements have probably been between myself and the chairman of the HBC. Joe Chappell and I are personal friends. We'll probably be personal friends tomorrow. We may even have lunch together. So if we say things tonight, it doesn't mean we dislike each other or we're enemies or anything like that. We just disagree on some points. I don't think city staff is not the enemy. I think city staff's just trying to implement projects to enhance the quality of life in our community and to make Guthrie more appealing to retain and recruit young families, young professionals, and entrepreneurs. Not everyone will agree with my presentation tonight. I respect their opinion, and while they may disagree, hopefully they will at least respect that I'm entitled to have an opinion as well. However, currently things are not working well and the situation needs to be addressed in my opinion. So I've kind of done my apology in advance. I'm going to start out, what is this? And what I learned in college is a camel is a horse designed by committee.
Half of it.
If you got too many players involved and too many groups and decision maker, and it's not clear who makes final decision, then you don't get something designed well. It goes 100 different ways. And that's a saying that a British car designer came up with, but it has a lot of truth to it. You can't have too many chiefs and not enough engines on a project. The way I see it, there are some people that believe there are elements to the Historic Preservation Commission ordinance that the hierarchy command, even though the city council approves the project and instructs city staff to build it, then we're subject to go into the HPC, and if we don't get a certificate of appropriateness, then we're being told by HPC that staff can't follow through and do what the city council's telling us. We got some concerns about that hierarchy. The other way, if you look at it and turn the triangle around and you look at them as co-equals, then city staff basically has two bosses. And if one of them tells you one thing, one of them tells you another, who do you listen to? Of course, it's pretty easy for me. I know who signs my check.
Sign your own check.
That's the best idea I've heard tonight. To me, it's more, city council is the final decision maker. City staff and the Historic Preservation Commission are more at the same level. And on public projects, HPC should be more in an advisory capacity and working with staff to make sure that the public projects are done appropriately to complement the historic district. I want to start out, there seems to be some misconceptions about city staff by at least some players in the community, that city staff does not support or have an appreciation for preserving Guthrie's unique historic treasures and rich cultural history. Some express city staff has limited experience dealing with historic assets. That city and staff and consultants have limited knowledge to design and build public works and park projects. I'd like to take just a few moments to try to address some of those misconceptions. I'm going to show you some historic preservation efforts that I've been involved in the past. I might point out all the projects I'm going to point out were not done with the benefit of a Historic Preservation Commission. All the prior communities that I worked in did not have a Historic Preservation Commission. We did those things because they were right things to do. And I'm also going to show some examples of prior community improvement and park-related projects. I worked 10 years in the city of Coffeyville, and while it's a different history, Coffeyville, Kansas has a pretty elaborate history and cultural amenities as well. During my tenure there, during my tenure there, this is the building, one of the banks the Daltons tried to rob. And that building has been completely restored, and that was predominantly a city-funded project. The restoration of the outside was pretty much done when I started my tenure. But we did come back during my tenure and put a new roof on the project. We tuck pointed the bricks. We brought in a special restoration firm to do that because the quality of the masonry and the tuck pointing had to be matched so that we didn't do damage by putting the new masonry in the tuck pointing process. During my tenure, we took the bank area, this part's occupied by the chamber. We took the bank area that was involved in the robbery, and we did research on what it looked like in 1892. We found as many pictures. We rebuilt that. That was not there. We rebuilt the inside of the bank to look very much like, based on pictures of what it looked in 1892. This is a Art Deco movie theater, and the individual that owned it was getting to retirement age. The city of Coffeyville, under my leadership, purchased that building. We purchased the adjacent building, which was a car dealership. They had a massive elevator in there to put cars on the second floor, and that building had some unique history in itself. Again, we put new roofs on both of these buildings. We come in and tuck pointed them, secured the windows so that the buildings were weather tight, and then we set up a nonprofit committee to start working on fund drives to restore the inside of the theater. This is the Brown Mansion in Coffeyville. Our historic society had limited resources, and when these columns were getting in bad shape, City of Coffeyville provided the matching funds for them to secure a grant to restore those columns. We helped them build a parking lot, helped maintain it, and through an intercooperation agreement, when the Historic Society was having funding problems, we actually took over their accounting and payroll services so that they could save money for other things to do. The next one, we built a new aquatic center when I was in Coffeyville. And there was a WPA pool right here that we took out. We had about a foot of water we had to make up every day because of the leaks. When we took it out, we were glad that we did. It sat on the side of the hill, and there was a cavity under that. And eventually, that large swimming pool probably would have slid down the side of the hill. But in that process, while we were building new, we maintained the PWA era bathhouse with the ideal that we would come back later and make that some kind of recreational or facility for birthday parties, those kinds of things. So even when we built new, we tried to maintain historic elements along with those projects. When I was I spent 8 years in Cali County, and when I was there, there's 1,700 stone arch bridges remaining in the United States. We had 18 of those, and I must have pushed a button. It didn't agree.
It's over.
There we go.
There it is.
Try not to push that button again.
Turn off, the party's over.
But county government maintained those 18 historic bridges. They weren't on our main highways anymore, and we could have ignored those. But because of their historic significance, we maintained those arch bridges in Cali County. When I was in Catoosa, before I got there, they had about a 24-inch snow, and about half of this roof collapsed. We had to rebuild that museum. We had to box and remove all of the artifacts in that museum and store them, reconstruct it, put all those back. So I just wanted to point out, because maybe not everybody knows, but we have been involved, city staff, in a lot of projects that take great interest and pride in historic restoration, and we do have some experience in that field. From a park project, I just want to point out that we also have experience in parks. While I was in Coffeyville, we had a public golf course that was 9 holes. It was a Perry Maxwell design course. We brought in a architect that specialized in that type of design of golf courses. We expanded it from 18 holes to 18 holes in 1998. In 2001, we went back and did the original 9 and renovated those. City crews built hard surface cart paths for both the original 9 holes as well as the 9-hole expansion. Didn't kill any trees, Joe. And then we did the clubhouse renovation in 2002. We must have done a pretty good job on building the cart paths because we did an interlocal agreement with the local country club and built their cart paths for them as well. Again, this is the aquatic center that we built during my tenure with sales tax revenue. Out of electric revenue, the city researched, designed, and built a stadium that seated 5,500 people. It was used by our community college, our high school for football, for soccer, and even this had a historic element to it. We had a building burn in our community that was a veterans hall. It was underinsured, so there was no way that that would be rebuilt. So we worked with the local veterans to name this facility Veterans Memorial Stadium. And in the front of this structure, we took columns from the old Veterans Hall and some of the architectural elements and put it into the entrance. And in the planning process to use this parking lot more than just during football season. The plans were eventually to put a softball complex here. During my tenure there, we built Walter Johnson baseball field that was used by the high school traveling team in the summer and the community college. We put playground equipment in every major park we had in the community with picnic pavilions for shade and opportunities for people to have picnics that were well received. This was a WPA era road that had been abandoned, and working with one of our local leadership classes, we matched their fundraising with city funds, and we restored that into a walking trail. We built many facilities at our rodeo and fairgrounds to support our interstate fair and rodeo. Just to give you some idea that people that maybe don't know some of the work history of myself and staff, we have done a lot of park projects. Now I'm going to transition and talk about the timeline on the Mineral Wells Park. In July of 2018, we had a public hearing on Mineral Wells Park project. Just in case my eyes aren't good enough to read it up there, if you look at the minutes from that meeting, there were 13 community members in attendance. At that meeting, the council members recommended adding a parking area, benches, and additional shade to the project. So some elements of the park project were requested or directed by the city council. I'd also like to point out that no one pointed out at this hearing in July of 2018 that the park was in the historic district. I know that's staff's fault, but no one on staff was aware that the park was inside the historic district, including the city planner, who was the primary grant writer on the grant and served as the staff person for HPC. Over recent years, there's been multiple park improvements that have been submitted and that have not been submitted to HPC for review in that park. So I think you can understand why there was some confusion. The grant was awarded to the city in November of 2019. We went to the December 4th City Council meeting and presented the grant opportunity.
So that's supposed to be 18, because we're not,
27's not even here yet.
it should be 18, right?
18.
Again, as I said in advance, you all called me 1,000 times the last 2 weeks on some issues that you're going to discuss later. So yes, that is a typo. In November 27th of 2018, it was awarded. We brought it to council, they accepted. That's when we were told at that meeting in December that made staff aware that the park was in the historic district. This is some examples. When I came here in February of 2017, the city was in the process. They'd already went out for bids and were getting ready to construct a new basketball court in Mineral Wells Park and refurbish the tennis courts. That didn't go to HPC, and that's the first project I was introduced to. So how was I to glean that things in Mineral Wells Park was in the historic district and needed to go to HPC when the city's in the middle of a project when I first come here as city manager, and nobody even took it to HPC, and HPC did not raise the issue. This road connecting to the rodeo grounds was built without any input. My understanding, this water fountain was put in without going to HPC. I point this out, we have a lot of green fixtures and in Mineral Wells Park now, And there was one HPC member indicated that they wouldn't support our project because they wanted black benches because that's what they have in Central Park in New York. We thought that was a little far-reaching. We took the project to historic. So we found out in December 4th that it was in the historic district. We took the project to the next meeting of the Historic Preservation Commission. We presented the concept plans that we had for the application. Unfortunately for us, that was during a time period when Aaron was out for surgery, so we don't have a tape to go back on this one. But discussion item 1 was discussion and potential action on the proposed mineral wells project. The grant application was written by our city planner, was the predominant author of the grant application. In her staff report, she said the application copy is available on request. It was 97 pages, and staff recommended approval of the project and acceptance of the grant funds. I've heard lately that some people thought that we had not received the grant at that point, that we were asking permission to apply for the grant. No, the grant had been funded. We were asking for permission to construct the project. At that meeting, as I was indicating, Aaron had been out for surgery, so we don't have a tape to go back. Rebecca was in transition to another job in another community and even failed to insert the motion in her draft minutes. We had to come back and amend the minutes later in the June or July timeframe because she left that motion out of the minutes. Without a tape, we're kind of suffering, or we're relying on some sketchy memories. But Dan Cassie communicated with the chairman of the Planning Commission, and he sent an email, and this is what we used to do an addendum to the minutes to show it was approved. The chairman said there were several citizens that attended and spoke in favor of the project. There was discussion, or at least Chairman talked to Rebecca and Leroy about involving HPC in the positioning of the gazebos and some oversight by HPC on designs. If I remember Chairman Chappell expressing those thoughts during the discussion, but I do not recall them being part of the actual motion that was approved. Of course, it's debatable, but I do not recall HPC when they approved the project, requesting the submission of any additional documents or detailed plans. Typically, of my experience with HPC, they're not bashful. And when they want additional documents before they give final approval, it's pretty plain that night that they want more documentation, not 6 months later, that night. Again, miscommunications, and we take part of the responsibility for that. Seems like I'm stuck in place here.
Where's Aaron?
My wheel's not working.
Comes Justin to the rescue.
We wouldn't know what to do without
Yeah,
Justin.
that's true.
Subsequent to the HPC meeting, any project that receives federal funding, and the OTRD funds are federal fundings, we have to go through what's called a Section 106 review. This is the letter from SHPO in March. We couldn't even start designing the project or spend any money on it until we went through this review and got final release of the funds. In March, we got the letter from SHPO, and I would point out, SHPO's letter says, we find that there are no historic properties affected by the reference project. So that was SHPO's review of the project. If you'd advance, Justin. Based on the comments from the HPC chairman at the January meeting, city staff has had several communications and meetings with the chairman during the review of the park improvements prior to letting out for bids. Unfortunately, because Joe and I have such a close relationship, he feels comfortable stopping me on the street, stopping by the office. I wished I'd have known that it would be questioned how many visits we had. I had to make better notes, and I will in the future. I'll carry a notebook with me when I'm out walking the streets. But I didn't realize it would be important to document that. If we go forward, Justin. This is an email from July of 2019. The chairman of HPC come to us with a proposal on a company to use for the pavilion. It's one that his family's company uses, and they were very satisfied with it. He thought they would fit in the park. I sent this document to our Public Works Director and our city engineer firm that's designed the project. We picked one out of that book as the design element for our shelters or pavilions, whichever one you call it.
Gazebo.
Our understanding was the chairman of HPC was comfortable with that and was supportive of that design for the shelters. Justin, if we could advance. Let me try this and see if, Justin, you're stuck there. This is a email from September 20th. And if you'll notice in our concept drawing, there was a pavilion here, a pavilion here, a pavilion there, there, and there. The chairman of the HPC, and working with him on this project, he thought there was too many shelters clustered towards the front of the park and in the vicinity of the large pavilion there. We worked with the chairman of HPC, and we scattered those out and moved them where they were not all clustered together. And even, this is one generation, a second generation, we even moved this one over here and scattered them out further. Next slide, Justin. This is just a note on meeting with the chairman on September 23rd on the project. Again, Justin. So this is, again, conversations between Mr. Chappell and myself, and the chairman says, after conversation on Monday, I spent some time thinking about the changes in mineral wells. I know from our visit that you and Tenny have given a great deal of thought to this whole project, and I appreciate the effort. I still have major concerns about precast concrete curbing, and goes through concerns about the trees and what happened on Main Street when there was sidewalks put on Main Street. And I wasn't here, didn't know about that project, but I didn't think that the two were necessarily correlated. Just because you put sidewalks on Main Street, kill trees, that necessarily would be the same in the park. The chairman went on to say, I do think improvements to park are going to be great for the community. It's my hope that we can get these improvements to keep as much of the park historic charm as possible. And I'd appreciate a chance to visit with you again. I'm out of town until October 7th. Next slide. Again, communication with the chairman. Joe, we're always glad to meet with you. At this point, however, we're planning to move forward with putting the project out for bids. We wanted to get some bids because we knew there was a possibility we may have to make adjustments to the projects once we got those bids in, depending on price. in the communication to the chairman, we have relocated the picnic pavilions away from the historic pavilion and spread them out best we can. We've reduced the total to 5. The existing pavilion will be removed. There's an existing pavilion down by the basketball court. Our thought process, we would remove it, use it in another park, and use one of the new ones at that location where there was an existing pavilion, because it would make everything look more uniform. And then we explained to the chairman we were not installing concrete curb and gutter. Our thoughts were, if you used concrete curb and gutter, as the chairman had mentioned in the slide before, that it would be a drainage project and you would be pushing water away from the park. But by not using curb and gutter and using the stop blocks at the end of the parking places, that the same amount of water would get into the park as does today. The water wouldn't go away, it would just go off the paid parking service into the park, rather than be directed away from the park by curb and gutter. And we tried to explain that, and we showed a sample of the stop blocks. Next slide. And then we get a email from the chairman on October 21st, says, since our last visit, I've spent some time studying the Guthrie Historic Preservation Ordinance. It is very clear that any improvements or alterations in Mineral Park must go through HPC process. I know that you believe HPC has already approved the project. I respectfully disagree. HPC only approved conceptual plans. The language in this email is applying to me that even though the project had been approved by City Council, it still had to go be found appropriate by HPC. So again, who's in charge? It also seemed odd to me, while the project was not a secret, everyone knew we were working on it, that no one, including the chairman of HPC, indicated that it needed to go back to HPC from January until October. And all of a sudden in October, when the chairman's disagreeing with us, now it has to go back to HPC, but before then it didn't. And now, again, Joe and I are close friends. We can disagree, and it's like two brothers disagreeing to some point. And I hope you all understand that. I'm not here to lambaste Joe, but we clearly disagree on this.
You're both grounded.
Yeah, well, we most might get reprimanded later. Go to the next slide. So modifications after we open the bid is all this in red because the chairman expressed concerns there's too much paving, it would have an impact on the trees. Originally, we had hard surface paths where you could go to the playground or to the pavilions for multiple directions. We've changed that where you have a hard surface, but it's one directional. And so everywhere you see this red, we have eliminated hard surface walking paths to reduce the amount of hard surface to protect the trees. We eliminated this parking lot. We eliminated this shelter. I visited with the chairman of the HPC and showed him a marked up version of this and told him that we were doing new drawings, and I respectfully requested the chairman prior to the November 4th meeting to table the item at November 4th and allow us to do new drawings that were not scribbled on so that we'd have something to present. Just like any private business, when they ask to table something in the next meeting, that's normally done. The chairman refused to do that. He said that he wanted to go for it and have the discussion, even before we could prepare the revised plans.
Now, the reason for the hard surface was to make sure it's ADA acceptable or available?
Correct, and which we have to meet.
So for wheelchair and other individuals?
Go to the next slide. This is the revised plan, and you can see it's less busy. There are 3 new, instead of 5, we reduced it to 3 shelters. This is the playground area, where the existing playground is, and this is the splash pad that's going over the old wading pool.
So does all this affect, I don't mean to, I have to jump in real quick. Does all this affect the cost of this whole project, obviously?
Well,
to
every
some
time we
degree.
have to design something, we have to go out and measure, we have to have,
I'm
new
talking
drawings.
about it reduces it because you've reduced the whole project, right?
Correct, it does affect it to some degree, yes. Okay,
I thought, Walsh, we got granted.
because of the chairman's concern, we also went and talked to an arborist, which is a tree specialist. And we talked to a certified arborist, he's preparing this letter. And to summarize this, he told us, when he looked at the plans, looked at the park, he said, look, you got trees down here that have, there's a lot of dead wood in them. They have passed their life expectancy. They need to be removed anyway. That there's too many trees. The canopies are all fighting against each other to survive. And if we're going to do the park appropriately, we should remove the trees that have the dead wood in them and then plant new trees to grow to take their place. That the old trees that are in the process of reaching their life maturity with the dead wood in them are becoming a safety hazard. Limbs are falling out of them. They'll fall on cars. They'll fall on the new equipment. They'll fall on people. So he's recommending that we look at the trees that need to be removed and remove some of those and do new plantings. And we will share that letter with HPC. And he's preparing us a formal letter, and his overall recommendation was that several trees currently should be removed and start over with young, healthy trees. He seemed to be very excited about our project and was excited to see Guthrie trying to take some steps to move forward in a positive manner. Next slide. What everybody needs to remember, HPC looks at it from HPC's perspective. When staff works on it, we got competing or conflicting constraints that we have to navigate and meet. We have directives from the city council, we have input from HPC, we have input from the general public. Of course, we have limited staff and financial resources. We have to meet the American Disability Act. We have to follow public bid law and city purchasing procedures. We can't, just like the private sector, if you say, we want this color, we want it to look this. That's not always possible in a public entity because we have to take a low bid. And so sometimes we can't say, well, we want that one. We have to put it out for bids. We have to follow the guidelines and standards of the grant. And then we have to follow safety standards for playground and splash. So there's a lot of conflicting constraints that city staff gets pulled a lot of different directions in trying to satisfy all these requirements. Next slide. Project timeline going forward. We opened bids on the 25th, and because those bids were higher than we originally thought, we are making some modifications. The bids are good for 45 days till December 9th. Our plans are on December 2nd, HPC meeting. Although we question that you need everything, we are going to give HPC the entire bid specs, construction standards, which will include the water line, the sewer line, everything. And HPC can make themselves happy looking at those 300 or 400 pages of construction standards and documents. Then on December 3rd, we plan to come back to City Council, share with the City Council HPC's input, and then staff will recommend award contracts for all or specific parts of the project. Of course, council has the full range of options. They'll be able to award the contract for all or specific parts of the project. They can reject all bids, and we can request an extension from OTRD and rebid the project at a later date. We can start over, redesign the whole project. We can seek OTRD's approval to relocate the project to another location, or we can just simply cancel the project. All those are available to us. Staff just wants somebody to be in charge to tell us, hey, this is what you're going to do. After all the inputs done, somebody's got to have final word. Yes, sir.
Well, it looks to me like the project's already been completely redesigned from what we approved.
There's been a lot of modifications
How
to
come,
trying
I
to
mean,
make.
you'd think we'd see that during the process.
Well, staff, I didn't know that you would ask that question, but staff has brought the project back multiple times to city council and made presentations. So you have seen some of
We
that.
have seen some, but,
Yes,
you know,
but not
I mean, the
all.
entire project has changed from what we approved, is what I'm saying.
Not entirely. I
lot.
mean, it has had changes, location, but the same elements, but they've been moved around. The chess pieces have been moved, same chess pieces.
Well, I thought
Rook's
once we
still
got
there.
grant money, we had to stay with our original plan.
We have to stay within certain guidelines. There is flexibility. And we have been working with the.
But can we
OT
still use our in-kind on this new redesign?
Yes. And OTRD, we have communicated with them. They're okay with the changes that we made. So the granting inning's okay. And the reason you haven't seen the last one is because now we would have introduced it tonight and presented it to you tonight to recommended changes, but we want to go back to HPC one last time, give them other opportunity to comment on the latest edition or draft before we bring it back to you.
Do you have a slide of what we approved originally? With the
The concept
equipment
plan,
and
the
everything else?
first one I showed, what was approved and what was the grant application was built around. And it is the one that was approved by city council. It was the one that was approved by OTRD. It has the same elements. It has an aquatic center, has not changed, location's not
Splash pad.
changed. I mean,
Splash
splash
pad.
pad. It has the same playground equipment that's
Railroad
never
theme.
moved.
The railroad theme?
Yes.
Okay.
Same thing, railroad theme for splash pad. Same shelters. They've been moved to a different location, then spread out, and cart pass and parking. So some of the chess pieces have moved, but it's basically the same project.
I got another question. I was out there a couple weeks ago, just driving through, because someone had said something to me about a gazebo that's existing out there. And I'd never seen it before for all the tall grass. And so I started looking for it. My daughter and I were driving by and said, there it is, Dad. So we drove back there and we looked at it, and it's really, really cool. And I'm just wondering why we're not staying with that same design. I mean, if we've got the actual prototype of what was there, why?
Cost
Okay.
is one thing, and the other is the detail of construction that would be involved, and then making that larger for picnic area would.
Well, that was
would
just
present
got the
difficulties.
spring bubbling out.
Correct.
Which
Right.
is
It
really
was-
cool.
yes.
And we ought to really
Yes.
highlight that.
What we went with our design of the pavilions was something more complementary of the large pavilion that sits in the center of the park,
Okay.
and trying to use roof
More
lines
in that
and stuff.
style of building, so
Correct.
wood construction, frame construction.
Correct,
Okay.
Now, the bid is good until the December 9th.
correct.
Does the grant have any kind of time stipulation on it?
Yes, but we have worked on these grants before, and we can, if need be, we can get extension.
Okay, so that's not an issue.
No, we're not concerned about that. I would point out, I've got a few more slides if you bear with me, on the historic preservation ordinance, on section 11, certificate of appropriateness applications. Applications for construction, alteration, restoration, and removal signs, including sandwich boards. That goes through the process. Then you get to number 2, all other applications for certificates of appropriateness shall be accompanied by the following documents when relative. City staff and/or the commission will determine which documents are relative to the application in question. Again, you got 2 partners, 2 players. There's nobody that's in that sentence that says, okay, what if staff and the commission disagrees? Who makes the decision? So again, another place for conflict. Section 12, certificate of appropriateness, general provisions and procedures. It's not the intent of this section to limit new construction to any one period or architectural style, but to preserve the integrity of historic and architectural resources. It is the intent of this section to ensure compatibility of new construction by approving only new or infill construction that is compatible to adjacent properties and approving only additions to existing resources that are compatible with the property in question. In the definition, section 4, compatibility is defined as capable of existing together in harmony. If we go to the next slide. Under the guidelines, which is a supplement to the ordinance, local, state, and federal laws and policies may affect decisions for changes within the historic district. Projects must comply with the American Disability Act, Guthrie Code, Guthrie Historic Preservation Ordinance, the Secretary of Interior's standards for rehabilitation. Of course, this is not a rehabilitation project, and other regulatory documents. So even in the ordinance, it's recognized that there are other rules like the American Disability Act that have to be met. And number 5, new construction, recommendations for new construction include new designs are not to create a false historic appearance. So you're not supposed to try to go back and make it look just like it did in 1890. Infill construction is to be contemporary yet compatible with the historic character of neighboring buildings and the historic district in terms of size, scale, designing, detail, material, color, and texture. We think we've achieved that. Next slide. Again, the ordinance that we introduced tonight, the change is how we determine appropriateness. And again, you get back to the triangle. Who's on top? Who makes the final decision? And this ordinance would clearly state that the city council is the final sole discretion on whether the project gets built or not. Next slide. There are a lot of trigger words and phrases in our ordinance now that makes confusion. For example, in section 12, it says no permit for building, sign, demolition, or house moving shall be issued by the city for any resource located within a historic district, designed or landmark site until the application for such a permit has been reviewed by the commission and a certificate of appropriateness approved by the commission. Many times, HPC tells us that is the trump card, and they have to give a certificate of appropriateness no matter what city council told us before we can build something. Under section 10, work requiring review by the city. The provisions of this ordinance shall likewise apply to any resource that is designated, and then you go on, or located within a historic district, which is owned, leased by a public entity to the extent permitted by law. Again, that's another trump card that gets played a lot. So there's a lot of provisions in that ordinance that we get told as city staff, no, we have to approve. It doesn't matter what city council says. We got to approve it before you can build it. If you go on. The section in the ordinance by reviewing documents that city staff determine are relevant to such public improvement review. If we could go to the next slide. Again, if you look at the section on certificate of appropriateness, it says city staff and/or commission will determine which documents are relevant to the application in question. Who makes the decision if it is a disagreed upon? It should either say the commission or city staff. The only thing that really bothered me is when I heard some people were saying city staff wanted to change this provision because we wanted to be able to hide things from the HPC. And I would challenge anybody to provide us an example of past practice where staff has done that. I think that's an outlandish statement. If we could go on, Justin. Okay, that's the end of my presentation, and I will end it with this thought. I believe I've made my concerns clear tonight. I know that the city council has other significant issues to deal with yet tonight, and the balance of the agenda. Therefore, to allow more discussion and time to work through these issues between council, staff, and HPC, I would gladly recommend that this item be tabled to a future meeting where we can have some other discussion with the HPC council. But I thought it was important to clarify some of the timelines, how much involvement through their chairman that HPC's had on this project, and get that out so that everybody's aware of that. And then hopefully we can have a series of meetings and come up with something we can all agree to on who is the hierarchy, who makes the final decision, and how the process is supposed to work.
You're talking
Thank
about a
you.
workshop? Is that what you're saying?
I didn't use that word, but
I did.
you did.
Yes.
And that is possible.
We're getting there.
Joe, I don't know that I've got your name on the list here. Actually, I don't. Oh, yeah, it is. It is here.
You're not signed up,
It is
Joe.
here. It says that you can speak for 1 minute. No, I'm kidding on that.
I won't be as long as Leroy. And I'm a better friend to him than he is to me.
You need, please identify yourself and your address.
I'm Joe Chappell, and I'm chairman of the Historic Commission. You know, I didn't plan to speak tonight because I didn't even bring my notebook, which several of the councilmen have seen. But I do want to address a couple of things. I didn't even take notes, so I will be way briefer than Leroy was. But anyway, when we approved, and there's confusion about, times, but in January, and I wish I had my notebook, may not be good with dates, but in January when the HP approved the concept, I was totally against it initially. When Rebecca brought it to my attention, I went to her office and I said, that park's sort of pristine and it's historical and it's just sort of a little jewel. And anyway, through conversation with her, and she said, I was told, and I know for a fact that I was told that it was a conceptual plan to apply for the grant. I don't know if that fits in with Leroy's timeline or not, but that's what I was told. And I know that in my paperwork that's at home, if I'd known Leroy's presentation would have been that long, I could have gone home and got it. But in my paperwork, everything in that first presentation was conceptual, proposed. We had no inclination that that was it, that was our final look at it. And Leroy can say that all HPs are nosy and they come back and they push and they want to find out what's going on. That didn't happen. I didn't know when the grant had been granted. I didn't know how much I didn't remember how much the grant was for. And when there were several times that I poked my head in Leroy's office and he always welcomed me in. And I shared with him some ideas that I had. Now, our first, what I call sit-down official meeting, which he placed up there, Tinny was there, and Tinny brought all of his, paperwork, and it seemed very formal. And my first comment was, when you bring this back to planning, we can discuss some things.
Planning or HP?
Oh, yeah, sorry, I'm on planning too. I'm actually planning representative on HP. I asked when he brought it back to HP, we could discuss some of these things, and he immediately told me that as long as he was the city manager of Guthrie, that it would not be brought back to HP. That's a quote. And I remember being sort of shocked by it, but honest to God, I didn't know if that wasn't the case, that as city manager, he could do that. You never really read your ordinances until you need them, okay? So And at that time, he asked me for some suggestions. He asked me what color the benches should be. And I said, well, you know, at the turn of the century, I don't know that they had green, and I think maybe they should be black. And I walked over to the window and looked at I can't even say the word now, I'm so.
Apothecary garden?
Apothecary
Yeah,
garden.
the garden, and I pointed to the bench. And then I expressed some concerns. I expressed several concerns because I thought, well, you know, if we're done here, then I will try to get as many things that I think are important in the park. And I did talk to Leroy even after that. And then I left for Mexico. And when I was in Mexico, I wrote that letter that I still had some concerns. And when I received his reply that said, we're always happy to sit down with you, Joe, but we're going to apply for the bids. I remember being shocked by that at the time because I just didn't know that it was that far along. And granted, it was a long time from January to August or September when we started talking about this, but I just assumed that it would, you know, it was brought to HP. It'll be brought back to HP at some point. So then I researched my ordinance. I highlighted everything that I thought proved that this project should have input and oversight from HP. I've shared that with some of the council. And I wrote Leroy a letter. You know, it had been January since we'd heard anything on the commission about this project. I wrote Leroy a letter that basically said, and you saw it up there, that I had read the ordinance, and it was pretty clear to me that the ordinance was clear that that this falls under the auspices of HP. And I said that working together, I think that we can do, I was excited about the project. I think that we could do some great things. And Leroy's response was, I will have the city attorney review the ordinance. That was it, period. Also in that letter, I stated that I wanted to have the meeting, that I wanted the park put on HP's agenda. So I reached out to Dan, and I told Dan, first in an email, and then he asked me if it
That
was
was a
something.
5-minute timer, by the way.
Oh, yeah. Well, if you're going to enforce it, I'll sit down. But I'm almost through. So I will come in like 35, 40 minutes less than what you heard from Leroy. So then, where was I in my long story?
I'm
You
sorry.
had it on the agenda.
Yeah.
Yes,
Get it on the agenda.
I requested it be put on the agenda. I emailed Dan, and he emailed me back and asked, you know, is something specific or general? And I just asked for it to be a conversation about the park project. Well, I called Dan, as I remember it, and Dan said, well, I really don't understand because you've already approved the plan. So I felt like I was, you know, these are my memories. I remember thinking, well, okay, so this is the narrative that I'm going to get from staff. We approved the plan. And then, after I'd outlined all those things, I did go by Leroy's office. Before our meeting, 2 weeks before our meeting, Leroy called me and asked me to remove the park from the agenda. I don't have my notes here, but I've got this written down, and I've shared this with some people.
Our agenda is-
Okay,
Joe,
help me.
let me.
Help me back. No, but I want to get through this
Okay.
because it's going to, and I'm sorry it's as long as it is.
No, I
It
was
was
gonna
on,
But,
make a suggestion.
So I had it put on the agenda, and Leroy called me and asked me if I would take it off of the agenda. And I said, Leroy, no, I really feel like, you know, that it needs to be put on. And Leroy said, well, you know, if you're going to do that, I'm just going to limit your conversation to colors. And that's literally what you told me, Leroy. You said you would limit our conversation to colors. And then at the end of the conversation, he said, well, if you want it on the agenda, that's your meeting, you can do what you want to do. And he said, we'll just have our little pissing contest on Monday, and you have a good day. And that was the end of that conversation. So a week later, he called me again and asked me to take it off the agenda. And he told me that Rebecca had made some mistakes in the, not mistakes, but she left some things out. At some point in this, too, I will say that we talked about the sidewalks. I was concerned about the trees. I asked about the playground foundation because I was concerned about all the concrete foundations throughout the park. I brought that up. That was used against me many times, I felt like, in the conversations that I've heard, that they even want to control what's under the playground. But it was just my concern for the trees. And it seems like I was acting unilaterally here, but it wasn't. I didn't feel like I was. I was just looking out for the park. And I wasn't trying to bypass my, I started sharing. Once I realized what I felt like was happening, that HP was literally being ignored, and the new concept that Leroy has up here, for the, the pyramid and all that, he was using that pyramid in January, as far as I'm concerned. Also to address the fact that you don't have control over what we do. Anything that we don't have a certificate of appropriateness for can be appealed to you, I imagine by the city manager as well, and we can certainly be overruled. You have that power now. I've got one more. The last time he asked me to take it off the agenda. He told me that Rebecca had left some things off of the budget so that the sidewalks were not going to be there anymore. Oh, one other thing. I don't think I said this because I think this was important. And if I said this, forgive me. But when he called me the first time to ask me to take it off the agenda, and he told me he would limit it to colors, he also told me, because the only request that I ever felt like anything that I had mentioned, the only thing was that a gazebo had been moved. But when he called me the first time to ask me to take it off the agenda, he told me that, well, we'll just move the gazebos back to the pavilion, near the pavilion. So I felt bullied during most of the situation. Excuse me. I was so disturbed that I was here without my notes. This is nearly the end. So, so some of the things had been removed, and he, as he stated, he wanted me to take it off the agenda so that they could come up with a new plan to bring to us. Now, we haven't talked about this park since January, and I've had felt that HP was being pushed away. I didn't want to take it off. I wanted us to have a discussion about it. During this period of time, too, I was communicating with the other commissioners and telling them my concerns. But some of the things had been left off the budget, and they were going to work on a new plan, and it would be better if we waited till the plan was done. And I said, Leroy, I just feel like it'd be better if we could have a meeting and all of the commission could discuss what their concerns and thoughts are about the park. I just think it's unfortunate that after we met in January and after the city became aware that this was a historic district, that we didn't have 5 or 6 meetings between, we had meetings, we had HP meetings, where we discussed fonts and colors, which we tend to do. But anyway, I also found out during this period of time, and I love Guthrie. I think everybody that knows me knows that. I think this project needs to be done right. I don't think it has to be done right now. I know that the completion date, that we don't have to have this done until May of 2022. I just want it done right. And I feel like, I feel a little bit like a victim in all this, honestly, because I just want to, I worked with Leroy on Halloween. I'll tell you this. Halloween day, I called Leroy and I asked to meet with him because I didn't want to have a pissing contest.
We better start using a different word.
Okay, I'm sorry. You can write me up.
Just a contest, we'll know what it means.
Anyway, I'm sorry that I'm saying, and I appreciate that, and I apologize to everybody, but that's what was said. So I went by Leroy's office on Halloween, and I walked in and I said, Leroy, I don't want to be against you. I want to be for you. I want to work with you. I said, I was on the planning commission when we worked on the accessory buildings. We had workshops. He listened to input from all of the commissioners, and why this wasn't that way, I couldn't figure out for the life of me. But that's the way it is, and that's the way I remember it. So
Okay.
that's,
Thank you,
yeah,
Joe.
and I'll take any questions.
Thank you.
I got a statement I was going to make.
Yes.
I'm going to be making a motion to table this, and I'm going to be requesting two scenarios go to workshop. First off, the entire park needs to come back to workshop on one scenario or multiple workshops, whatever it is. And then the second thing is the whole hierarchy of command here on what is the council supposed to look at with regards to with the changes that we have here in this little section. I'm tabling all of it at this point.
But to me, this is just my opinion. It should die on its merit. You guys have the right to appeal anything that we do. All we are is making recommendations to you.
We have that right at the present time.
Right.
Yes.
Exactly right.
You have that right.
Right. So,
And yeah, maybe there was bad communication, and maybe I failed in many ways to not, maybe the first time I heard that it wasn't going to come back to HP, I should have done my research right then. But I'm generally a person that likes to work with people. I'm not confrontational by nature, and I didn't feel confrontational until I read the ordinance and understand it. That ordinance has worked for us for 20 years. I don't think it needs to be tabled. I think we need to move forward. I don't think that city staff should ever be able to decide what's relevant, what a board or commission gets. I think they should be able to,
So let me back up.
Excuse me, Brian.
That's just,
Leroy asked
and
for some,
certainly I'm not telling anybody what to do.
okay. Leroy wanted a clarification comment.
Yes,
We'll hug later.
pardon me?
We'll hug later.
Okay. I can
'Cause
hug you now.
And clearly, our memories are different. But I respect your opinion. and hopefully you can respect mine. I did want to point one clarification. There is an appeal process, but if you go read that appeal process, it's like many things in an ordinance. It is not clear and does not say that the city council can overturn it. They can send it back to HPC.
That's not the way that's not the way.
Well, I think
I remember
there's a couple different things going on.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I hear in your presentation, verbal, and Leroy's presentation up there, that we want the park, that the project is a good thing for our community. Then we get to this very fragile thing that we call communication. And how do we best communicate? And how do we make that happen? I'm speaking just as one member of this council when I say I think I want the input from the Historic Preservation Commission on this particular project and other projects. But I also think that there are trigger words, and you and I have talked about that, in the ordinance that can be interpreted that you don't go any further on a project unless you have an approval by the commission. And just a minute. And I think we need to clarify that. And not just for us, but for posterity. Or 10 years from now, they're going to be sitting here debating about the same thing. And I don't think we need to reinvent that. So I think we need to take a look at that, and I think we need to, we, the council, and we, the commission, need to get together and have some dialogue about that.
Okay, I'm just going to say one more thing, if I can remember what I was going to say.
Well, you don't have your notes.
And I don't think I said this, but this is how I felt. You know, when I sent my letter that said I'd read the ordinance and I understood how it worked, and when Leroy responded that he would have the city attorney review it, to me it felt like the city attorney reviewed it, saw that I was correct, and all of a sudden there's a new amendment to the ordinance to change the way we play the game. And that's how I see it, and that's all I got to say.
Okay.
I'm going to make a motion to table this thing.
Second.
We have a motion and a second.
wanna- got
Is
more
there any
people
other
wanna talk out
discussion?
there.
I see her.
Okay.
Any other discussion at council?
You can still discuss.
I know. Okay.
We want to talk, fine. I'm not trying, we're not trying to get in anybody's way. I'm sorry. If you guys want to talk, talk.
I've got a list of about 6 people here, maybe more. I don't know if we want to take up more. Come on forward. Adam, I had you down first, but no, Lynn, you're not.
You're still waiting, Lynn.
Sorry, Lynn.
Okay,
Me first. Me first.
okay, Aaron, go ahead.
All right. I'm Erin Brown, volunteer for the Historic Preservation Committee, historian and curator at the Oklahoma Territorial Museum, where I've been there for 11 years. I serve on the committee as the special knowledge slot based on my education, my experience, and my access to the historic materials at the Territorial Museum. I didn't know we were going to be talking about Mineral Wells Park tonight. Otherwise, I would have brought my 45-page thesis on the history of the park for everybody to be familiar with. So I view it as my responsibility to not only provide information to the Preservation Committee members, but to the City Council with any information that may be relevant for the topics up for discussion. 2 side notes. The point in July 2018 that nobody brought to the attention that it was not a historic landmark, it was not in the district, that is wrong. I did it every single opportunity to anybody who would listen. And in January and February, when we gave the support for the grant, we asked specifically if we would be able to continue the conversation during the modifications throughout the process, through the grant process. And we were told yes. And that is the only thing that the HP committee is asking for, is to be a part of the continuing conversation. All right, with problems with the amendment. Guthrie is a certified local government with a SHPO according to the National Historic Preservation Act. Having a functioning Historic Preservation Committee is a key component mandated by the state and federal regulations. And it is supposed to be composed of a variety of individuals with specific training and experience. They're supposed to be the subject matter experts for you guys, so that you guys don't have to drill down into every bit of the nitty-gritty details. That's our job, for us to make the recommendations that get sent to you for then you guys to continue on doing all of the things that you do. We're supposed to be helping you. So the hierarchy is clearly stated already. It is clearly stated in the Certified Local Government Program, of which I put up 7 copies there. It's clearly stated in the SHPO ordinances. It is clearly stated in our ordinance. We haven't ever had a problem with it. I don't see why we have a problem with it now. So this amendment is problematic because the wording that it has in it puts at risk the certified local government status that Guthrie holds. And that is that came directly from the SHPO office this afternoon on the telephone call that I had with them. That language does not work, and we will lose that status. And if you don't know what the certified local government status allows us, it allows us access to state and federal grant monies, aid programs, et cetera. And losing that, that's something that we have fully taken advantage of in the past, and that would be like shooting ourselves in the foot. It's not a good idea. Two, for projects of which the city doesn't think is relevant to go through the HP committee, you are still going to have to go through the SHPO Section 106 review process according to the National Historic Preservation Act. And again, all that is already clearly outlined by numerous documentations in numerous places. And if you would like me to send you links so you can do research, I will send you a whole page in an annotated bibliography. It is 3 pages long, and it's over 1,000 pages worth of reading. But again, that is what the HP committee is supposed to do. We're supposed to be your subject matter experts. 2, for those grants and aid programs that don't require CLG status, they will still show preferential treatment to statements of support by an HP committee. So this amendment is not necessary and potentially problematic. And if the city, the staff, the HP committee is unclear on the hierarchy, then we should have, and absolutely should have, SHPO come and teach us all.
Okay.
So wait, before you go, comment.
Yes.
When I said I'm going to table this, that's exactly the reason I'm going to table this.
No,
but let me finish. Let me finish. The reason I'm going to table it is because this whole park that I'm seeing up here is totally different than what we approved as a council. And so what I'm tabling is not only this, but I'm tabling the entire park project to come back to a workshop.
Are they not two different things?
It's kind of all woven together at this point and convoluted.
The amendment, I
Joe,
don't
I know
think
that
is
you want it to be two different things. But I don't know, because here's what's happened. We made an approval on a park. Okay, that is nothing, that park looks nothing like what we approved at this point. So, no, they're not two different things.
Okay.
They're weaved at this point, because the entire project's been changed.
Okay.
So
Well,
that's why I'm tabling it to bring it back.
Okay.
Well, you have a motion to table.
A motion.
Let me,
to bring it back. It may not even go
ensure
through
that.
the vote.
Okay, so for,
But that's the reason for me anyway, is because this whole thing is nothing like what we originally did.
okay.
I think and I know that there's a number of other people that at least had listed their names here as wanting to speak. After these presentations and after the motion, which was also seconded, I think it would be better to have that dialogue at that point where we can really focus our time and maybe do a lot more communication between now and then.
And it gives you a chance to give us more input.
And get your notes and
That-
everything else.
wonderful.
Yeah, so I don't want to close out anybody that had signed up, but that's where I'm kind of headed right now. If anybody, I know you had your hand up there that you had to speak, and okay, Aaron, we understand. But the other people that have, I want to give you the opportunity, but if you feel comfortable with saving your comments for whether it be a workshop or whatever, another opportunity to discuss this, and as well as have discussion offline between now and then if you feel comfortable with that, we will hold that until we have that other opportunity, which is the motion is on the floor to do.
Okay.
Is that okay? Does anybody else have? Okay. Lynn, okay. Identify yourself, address.
My name is Lynn Bilodeau. I live at 215 South 2nd Street. Just want to say how much I love living in the city of Guthrie. I've made that comment many times before. Told Leroy right before this meeting how lucky we are to have Leroy as our city manager. I appreciate Leroy and everything he does here. Joe Chappell is my friend. I appreciate everything Joe does. A lot of this has just been miscommunication between them. The only thing I'm going to address, and I actually signed up for 2 things, but this is the only thing I'm going to address, just in case the motion to table it doesn't get passed, and you end up voting on this ordinance. The ordinance amendment that has been proposed as written goes way beyond anything you guys need to do. When I got my first job making $1.75 an hour, and I got my first check, I was appalled at what came out of my check for this stuff called Social Security. I was even more appalled when I found out that Congress opted themselves out of that Social Security system. So they weren't paying Social Security taxes, but I was. Now, fortunately, Congress came to their senses in 1984. And you hear the statement a lot of times, perception is reality. If you guys amend this ordinance like this, you are opting the city out of what you're asking every citizen to follow.
Amen.
And that's wrong. That's like the parent that says, don't do as I do as I say. That's not good parenting. That's not good governing. There is no chance, the HPC's the tail, the city council's the dog. We're not going to be able to wag the dog. You guys, and I know there's some trigger words, you were talking about some things. If a citizen has the right to appeal, or the city manager or the city attorney has the right to appeal to the council, that brings with it the right to get a result different from what was done before. So yeah, they can appeal to the city council. You know, don't opt the city out and tell all the citizens, but you guys still, if you live in the historic district, you have to follow the system, but we don't.
All right.
Well,
Thank you.
and again, I would like to have everybody in these workshops as well. So, I mean, I
Okay.
think it's a good thing.
We have a motion and a second on the floor. Is there any discussion on that motion? Okay. Adam?
My name is Adam Ropp. I live at 910 East Cleveland Avenue. I practically live in the Temple. My wife and I also own the Guthrie Depot, which is one of the prized jewels of the town, not because I own it, but because of what it is. And I'm also a historic preservation commissioner as well. My question, though, is if we're tabling it, does that mean you can bring it back later, right?
We're tabling it for whether it be a workshop or another opportunity to discuss with the Historic Preservation Commission 2 issues.
Let me clarify, because I think there's some
Yeah.
confusion on what I'm trying to table here. This thing's getting tabled, or the motion is to table this whole ordinance. But in conjunction with bringing back the entire park plan to workshop with HP, whoever wants to be there, the whole deal, because it's completely different than what we approved. I mean, it's
Yeah, I
kind of
don't-
like approving, a candy cane and you end up with an orange.
Right. I don't
Okay.
care. I don't care about the park right now.
Yeah, so-
I don't care about the park at all. What I care about is in this amendment, which is about.
That's what's on the
about-
agenda.
That's
Right.
what's on the
That's what's
agenda.
We're
on
not
the
talking
agenda.
about the park right now. We're talking about an amendment. And
Right.
that amendment pertains to everything.
Right.
It
Correct.
pertains to other buildings in town.
Right.
It pertains to the park. It has nothing to do with the park.
Right, well.
It's an amendment
It's
which is
more
about.
generic than
Right.
the park.
So it's separate. We're not voting about you guys aren't voting on the park. You're voting on what power you have. So
That's the
don't hide
agenda
behind the
item.
guys.
We already have the
about the
power.
park.
Yeah, no.
We already have
that's
the
already
power.
there.
We already
But
know
The
that.
reason I'm tabling this is to formally, not just table this, but to bring the park back. Because if I don't
Okay.
bring the park back in this vote, I don't know what's going to happen to it. Okay, so the park's got to be part of this process.
But the tabling is on this agenda item.
Right.
And the agenda item is not the park.
Right.
The
It is
agenda
on this
item, the agenda item is the amendment.
Right, to a workshop that,
Does that answer your question, Adam?
Yes, it
that
does.
help?
Thank you.
Okay.
And I had something else I wanted to say, but I was just want to get a question across
Okay.
because you guys are wanting
All right.
to vote on
Okay.
it. Okay,
All right.
thank you.
Very good. All right.
you'll be
so
invited to all of that.
We
now.
have a motion and a second, and we've completed our discussion. Please submit your votes.
All votes are in.
See the votes. By a vote of 6-1 to table this item on the agenda, which is the amendment, proposed amendment for further dialogue, future